Hello and welcome to Newspeak, New Culture Forum's look at the weekly news agenda. I am delighted to be, as usual, joined by Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, our senior fellow and historian and royal commentator, and Amy Gallagher, who is the woman behind Stand Up to Woke and campaigner. And thank you very much for coming. But before we talk about the week's events, just one announcement. It's to do with our locals programme. As you know, this has been going great guns over the past year, and we're starting off this year as we mean to go on. There are two dates actually which I wanted to give you notice of. The first one is in Brighton. We're going to be starting a group in Brighton. That will be on January the 31st, which is a Wednesday. January the 31st, a Wednesday in Brighton. If you're interested in that, then please do get in touch. I'll tell you the address in a minute. And then the second one is in Wellingborough, which is a bit topical at the moment because that is where they're having a by-election. That will be on February the 6th. February the 6th, which was actually the date of the late Queen's accession to the throne, 6th of February. So there are two dates there. If you are interested in either of them, if you're in Brighton or Wellingborough, do get in touch. The best thing to do is to go to locals@newcultureforum.org.uk as usual, and then what happens is we send you details of venue and time. Okay, hope to see you at one or other of those. Well, it's been quite a busy week actually on the news front in all sorts of different ways. But I wanted to start first of all, and Amy, to start with, really that we've had this what seems to be yet another report on grooming gangs, or rape gangs, as many people would prefer to call them, which came out basically about the situation in Rochdale specifically. What is the official response been to this particular report?
Yeah, so this report was commissioned to look at grooming gangs between, I think, about 2003 to 2013. It was commissioned in response to the BBC drama about the grooming gangs, which is something
rather
depressing in itself. That it takes a BBC. It seems to be the way of politics works now. You only get anything looked at if you have a BBC drama about it. But the outcome of this report is essentially nothing new, and it just shows that hundreds of girls were let down. Hundreds of girls were being raped regularly, sexually abused regularly by mainly Pakistani and Afghan rape gangs. And some of the individual stories coming out that are being highlighted are it's difficult to read.
Yes,
it's actually hard. I don't even want to say it on this show. It's the kind of terrible things about 13-year-olds having to have abortions, being ignored, being blamed for what they were experiencing, being told that they were part of the grooming, that whistleblowers like Maggie Oliver were largely ignored. It's just highlighting again how serious this issue is. It is still going on, and a lot of the perpetrators are still, that they've served either small prison sentences or they've now served the sentences, they're back in the community. It's just, for me, this is one of the most shocking things in my lifetime, I think, that's happened in this country. I think, to me, it's just, I still find it hard to read about more than anything.
I know there was one case of a girl that was highlighted by the Mail. Actually, as you say, it's hard to say on air.
Yes.
There was some detail about a fetus being kept as a kind of souvenir or something. I mean, it's just incredible.
The police were given loads of supporting evidence in order to convict, and they didn't take up the evidence or they ignored it. It was just, I think we talk about kind of systemic oppression or even systemic racism quite a lot. It's applied to everything. And I'm very hesitant to use that term because it's often used rather tenuously in relation to stupid things like historic links to slavery or whatever. This was thousands of white working class girls being picked on by Pakistani and Afghan men because they were white. There was an idea that they wouldn't do it to their own, that they saw white girls as subhuman, that they saw them as white trash and easy meat and so on. And not only were they abused because they were white, but the authorities ignored what was happening to them, largely because in some instances they were white and the perpetrators weren't. So to me, this is the most serious, prolific and egregious example of systemic racism of modern times. That's how I see it, And it's towards white working class girls. And there was never any protest. There was no, we had a Black Lives Matter movement in relation to the death of a criminal in America. Where was the protest for these girls?
It's the sheer scale of it, actually, Rafe, isn't it? I mean, it's like the rape of your daughters. I mean, it is like something biblical, isn't it?
Well, it's the greatest scandal of the 21st century. I mean, it's linked obviously to mass immigration, which is the biggest tragedy of the 21st century. This is the biggest scandal of the 21st century. And it's not just an issue of the past. And too much of the coverage is treating this as a review into a past incident, past scandal, like the postmasters. That was something that happened. No, this is carrying on today. And the media don't address this issue. The politicians don't address the issue. It continues everywhere. And it's not just Rochdale. And yet, if you were to read the media, this would seem to be an isolated case. Oldham, Rochdale. This is going everywhere. Even in sort of peaceful, leafy Oxfordshire, this stuff is happening on a daily basis. And the fact that our media still, you get these momentary blips where it gets coverage and the politicians get animated, and then suddenly it disappears again. But this is still festering below the surface. There's nothing new in this report at all. No one should be surprised by any of this. The details are shocking. And you say the police kept a frozen fetus. We had a girl kept in a cage. We had a man who injected one of these women with heroin and she died from that heroin overdose. I mean, absolutely appalling. And we shouldn't be afraid to talk about these things because this is the reality that's happening and people need to be awake and alert to what's going on. And everything Amy said is absolutely spot on and there's not much I can add to it because this is, racism is alive and thriving on our streets. Pakistani, Afghan, Bangladeshi rape gangs are perpetrating this. Our police are perpetrating this by refusing to investigate. Our social services are perpetuating racism by turning a blind eye to all of this. And our media and politicians are perpetrating racism by trying to cover it up, essentially. And the greatest tragedy of all, not tragedy, but the biggest scandal, I think, is that not a single person in authority has been held to account over all of this. No one from the police, no one from social services, or from Rochdale Council and Oldham Council, etc., have been charged. They should be losing their jobs, losing their pensions, and they should be in prison for this. Because as Amy said, just imagine if it was the other way around. There would be riots and mob violence on the streets. There would be a well-resourced police task force, and you would have the media and politicians screeching from the rooftops over this.
No, that's it, absolutely, isn't it? That it still is going on and appears to be, people say, oh, well, we've had these reports now and we've had a drama on television and all of that. But in fact, the actual situation has not really been, what would the actual, proper conclusion of this be? You're saying prison, right? Obviously, these people have got to go to prison, counsellors or whatever, or police people or whoever it is. And none of that has happened. Actually, you alluded as well to it there, Amy, but there is a sense that these girls are actually chosen and they're called white trash and everything. And I'm wondering as well, when you talk about the official response, whether in fact actually many of the people who should know better actually think of them as white trash. Do you know what I mean? I remember having a conversation, and I cannot say who it was a few years ago, but it was someone who was quite eminent on, if you like, our side of the political debate. And something like this was said, well, aren't they just little tarts? And I couldn't quite believe it. I mean, when you actually have to keep your tongue, do you think that that's been a part of it, that somehow or other that these people are considered to be so not worth helping, working class white girls?
I think there is such a complete hatred of what the white working class. White working class boys are being totally let down educationally, and then white working class girls are being totally let down in terms of safeguarding and safety. And nobody seems to care. It's just, they're just totally forgotten. It's it's incredible. I mean, it took a long time to be able to just talk about this issue because of accusations of racism. I mean, now media are saying Asian grooming gangs. They were reluctant to even say that for a long time. It was just sex abuse scandal, grooming gangs. And of course, Asian is a very broad term.
It's half the world's population.
Well, exactly. No, as Maggie Oliver often points out, it's not Japanese men raping young girls. It was specifically Pakistani and Muslims. Yeah, and this is tied to immigration. And one of the main reasons that people voted for Brexit was immigration. And I think this story was the thing that switched everybody on to the dangers of immigration. I think a lot of people voted, maybe even unconsciously, for Brexit because of this. I think it was underlying.
It's part of the same thing, isn't it? It's part of the same kind of.
And it's the Red Wall, isn't it?
It's the Red Wall.
Yes, exactly.
But I should say, actually, we do know from the reports that the police turned a blind eye because these were council estate girls. I mean, they even said that, and social services said, "Well, what can we do about it? These are just girls that are going to get up to this. Or that's the type of girl that they are." So that's exactly what was happening through all of this. So yes, we do need to, in terms of stopping what's going on today. If no one in authority is being disciplined for any of this, this will continue. Only if you have the most severe penalties for those people who have been found to be negligent or complicit in their attitude towards us over the past few years, only that will actually ensure that those people in power today will actually take a proper action on these sorts of things. And personally, I'd like to see hard labour for these characters. Even judicial caning. If they want to bring in foreign practices into our country, maybe it's time we adopted foreign practices in terms of discipline.
I think I'd like to see hard labour for those people who jump onto Twitter and say, actually, the vast majority of child abuse is carried out by white people. You get that now, It might actually, statistically be true, but what kind of mindset would it be that actually would sort of make that kind of remark?
But that's the first fault that you go to when you're hearing about thousands of girls being raped, that you're trying to suddenly defend these men. It's incredible. Yeah.
Actually, and they're silly, obviously, because the white population is so much larger, right?
Yes, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, it's not statistically. It doesn't make sense. Of course, white men commit more crimes, but there's far more of them. But this particular subsection of men commit far more crimes than white people.
And there's a deep. I once looked into issues of sexual and antisocial behaviours in London police reports, and what we found out was that, for example, black men were more likely to commit robberies and drug offences. White people were more likely to commit antisocial behaviour, drunkenness, and arson. Chinese and Japanese was more likely to commit white collar crime.
Yeah.
But within the South Asian community particularly, there's a problem with sexual offences. It's repression. You see it from these terrible rapes that happen, not just in Pakistan, but also in India, where girls terribly murdered on buses in the most horrific ways. I mean, there's a deep problem here with sexual relations and South Asians that people aren't actually brave enough to talk about. So there is a real problem with this demographic, particularly with the Muslim community.
This is what's bringing about the rise in sexual abuse of girls and women. And how this is being framed, usually by the left or Sadiq Khan or politicians, is that it's an issue of men, toxic masculinity, which of course it's not all men. It's a particular group of men, and often when it's portrayed, it's white men, but it's not.
Well, there was a famous case, wasn't there, when this originally came about in the early part of this century. One of these northern councils made a kind of public information film. And it was to try to warn girls about, because obviously it was in the air already. And, but of course, the guys in the cars coming to pick them up were white guys. I mean, it's totally and utterly wrong.
And what's worse is they made two versions. The original version had Asian perpetrators, and that was cancelled, and they remade it with white people.
Can you just speculate actually for a minute? Why it does appear that this particular problem is peculiar to Britain. As far as I know, if you think of the other problems that countries in Europe have with Muslim populations, for example, France we all know about, and Sweden. Why is it here that it takes the form, do you think, of grooming rape gangs? Or rather, should I say, why do they not appear to have it?
It's a curious question which I've not actually thought about, but you're quite right. I wonder whether these are scandals that have yet to actually hit the media. Maybe it's just that we're ahead of the curve in this, in terms of exposing this. Maybe because we've had these communities embedded for longer in our culture.
I don't think we have, though.
Only France is the only comparison to that. But apart from France, I think we've had it embedded more than anywhere else.
I think it's a very, very difficult one, but
also I think also another reason for this may be that the Muslim population of France is more North African Muslim,
yes,
rather than, and I think it's just that South Asian element, I think, which is the issue here.
Yes,
I think that as well, and perhaps we're just seen as more soft. You know, the country is seen by that particular group as being more soft than maybe other countries. I don't know.
I'm wondering whether as well it's something to do with where immigrant populations have gone largely post-industrial towns here. So, for example, we tried, looked into all of this in London when, a couple of years ago on the Assembly, and fact is, it does appear that there isn't the same problem in London as you're getting in these other cities. I can only think that's because there's no longer a kind of the remnants of a white working class in London, actually. Possibly. I mean, as opposed to Rochdale or Rotherham or Manchester or wherever.
Perhaps perhaps these particular areas, Rochdale, Oldham, are so deprived in a way that maybe Londoners don't realise that these white working class, they've just given up hope, or there's something that's happening in these towns where there is seems to be no sense of community, or certainly no relationship between the police and the white working class. That something has broken down seriously in the north, and as you said, it's not just the north, it is places like Oxfordshire and so on, but it does seem predominantly to be the industrial towns, as you say, that something is awry.
And it may be the case that there's more ghettoisation in France and in Belgium than here, so there's less interaction between white people and Muslims.
Yes, interestingly actually, because this week as well, Macron's been making, well, for him, sort of right-wingish noises, hasn't he? I think he did it, one of these, they have this in France, he had some huge live press conference that went on for most of the evening I think it was last night actually. But in it, he's obviously very frightened of the Marine Le Pen threat, which is largely based on French concerns, obviously, an utter rage about immigration. But he also went down the kind of route of talking about demographics and how France has basically got to have more kids. I mean, that's what it amounted to. You can sort of do it via tax situation, or you can do it this way or that way, but that's what it amounts to. I find this kind of quite interesting, actually, now. This is something, let's say, new, or it's rearing its head more in Europe now, isn't it? Don't you find?
It is, and France actually has the highest birth rate of any Western European nation, but it's not.
Isn't it mostly?
It's not enough to replenish itself. But yes, who is? I mean, that's the issue when you have these policies of pro-natalism. It's who actually are the ones who are going to be procreating more. But it's such a European concept, pro-natalism, which somehow just seems odd and bizarre for an Anglosphere nation to ever. There's something almost sort of communist about it. In Russia, you would get the Order of Lenin if you had 10 babies and a pension for life and everything. It's always been seen as a sort of not a very democratic sort of concept. But it's all tied in, of course, with this rise of Le Pen, as you say. And I think he knows, he's got 68%, I think it is now, unpopularity ratings. And this is just, as we see with Rishi Sunak, this is just an attempt to try to claw back territory from those who've parked there and park your tanks on the enemy's grounds. Whether we'll see anything from this, I don't know, because I'm not very optimistic that Emmanuel's going to win in the next election, so he can promise what he wants to.
But it's sort of also, it's seen, isn't it? It's sort of, this kind of natalism, it's seen as being, as you said, communist or a bit fascist, this idea, come on women, have babies. It seems to be, I would say, Hungary, of course, has done this. And of course, they are considered beyond the pale, but they've had a very strong program of encouragement for people to have bigger families. It's been slightly successful, apparently. It's not been an absolute, a huge turning point or anything. But Excuse me. But the thing is would women accept that even here, as you think?
Yeah, I don't know. It seems to be I mean, there are some politicians who are speaking out about it a bit more here. Miriam Cates, Danny Kruger, some of the new Conservatives are talking about birth rate in a way that we haven't really seen Conservatives do for a while. But it's just sort of it's just words. I mean, it's highlighting the issue. And there is more discourse, I think, around relationships and marriage and children in a way that there wasn't before. But I don't know that that's going to have much difference. I mean, I think a lot of the issues as to why people aren't having families are economic. That I don't think it's that. I mean, I think there are some women that don't want to have children, but I don't think it's the case that women don't want to have children, or that they've somehow been propagandized to think that a small subsection have. But I think most women still want to have families and have children.
So you think it's mostly economic?
I think it's difficult. You had to have a house and to raise a family. Now you probably both need to work, and it's very difficult, and it's...
And space, where are you going to bring up these children? I mean, one of the other things, of course, is it's cultural too. I mean, Japan, I would say Japan is about 20 years ahead of us in all sorts of things, technology, all sorts of things, reality TV shows. You remember Clive James? We've now got that. Oh my
goodness, yes.
And so, and I think one of the, if you look towards Japan, you have not quite incel, but you have these men who actually now have cyber girlfriends who are just these sort of AI creatures, because they have no social skills. They don't know how to interact. I think that there's a whopping percentage of the Japanese population under 40 at the age of 40 are still virgins, for example.
Really?
A huge percentage. And in this country, I think people under 20 or so in this country have never had less sex than they are having now. Despite they might think there are a few who are having much more sex thanks to the apps, but there are a huge portion who aren't actually interacting. So that's a much bigger problem. And I mean, there's one plus side. We have the lowest teenage pregnancies ever on record, partly because of this. But that ties into the broader issue.
Actually, I always used to think this was a Western thing about the demographic decline, but apparently, as you say, it's not. It's spread around the world, with the one exception of sub-Saharan Africa, where basically we actually had a guy on here speaking. Edward Pace wrote a book called Youthquake, where we don't even know what's going to hit us in terms of the sheer number of people in sub-Saharan Africa that are under 20 or whatever, under 30, just growing at exponential rates. But everywhere else in the world, it seems to be sort of in decline. What is America's situation in America? Isn't it about 2.1 or something like that? I mean, we're under replacement level, aren't we,
yes.
Britain?
We're under, everywhere in Europe is under replacement level.
Italy's the worst, I do know that.
It's only immigration's the only thing that's keeping this country's the population burgeoning in this Ponzi scheme that we have here. So we're now at a level where, America, famously land of immigrants, Britain has more people born abroad than America does, which is mind-blowing.
Yes, exactly. What did you make of this extraordinary, speaking of America, this extraordinary victory for Trump this week, Rafe? I say victory, you could maybe explain what the caucuses are, but it is...
So yes, when we're now in the process of the Republican Party selecting who its candidate is going to be to run against Joe Biden in the next election, and we saw the most earth-shattering victory for Donald Trump, who has shown clearly that he is unstoppable in terms of becoming the Republican candidate. There's a narrow window whereby Nikki Haley, one of his opponents, former governor of South Carolina, might get in, but Iowa, I mean, he broke all records in terms of his victory, and there are all sorts of reasons for that. I mean, one of the reasons is, of course, the majority of Republicans believe that that he didn't lose the election, because in American history, only one president, Grover Cleveland, has had two presidential terms, not in consecutive terms. That's because Americans tend to think if you've lost an election, you're a loser. We know how much Donald Trump hates being a loser, but people don't regard him as a loser. They simply think that he's been unfairly treated, and that so he's got this unique position where he is seen as the incumbent already, and that gives him an advantage. But he's also the change candidate. So he's got those two. He's uniquely able to ride these two completely different horses, and because he's also, of course, battling against the Biden factor, much as we had Boris Johnson, sweeping to victory because the enemy was Corbyn. Here again, Biden is so unpalatable, And the issues that have become most preeminent under Biden's term in office are the economy and immigration. Those are Trump's two big issues.
Yes.
In a sense, of course, inflation is a global phenomenon. In a way, Trump is lucky not to have been in office this term, because he would be battling with huge inflation anyway. It's unstoppable. So I think he would be leaving office now with a tarnished reputation if he'd stayed there because of the economic decline in America. But luckily, Biden's borne the brunt of that, which makes the path to victory for Trump even easier.
Do you know, when you see the opposition to Trump amongst the, if you like, the political class here, right, and in America, I read something by Janet Daly, for example, in the Telegraph recently, and it was sort of almost along the lines of, well, you know, how do we prepare for this terrible catastrophe? It was a long. She's a conservative commentator, by the way, and I just sort of thought, do you really believe this, or is it based, or if you do, is it based entirely on a distaste for his character and his personality? Because when it comes to the actual ins and outs of what happened under Trump, it was actually a good presidency, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was. I can't understand that kind of response now. I understood it on the lead up to Trump winning the first election, because we didn't know what he would be like as a president. You know, people. You know, I still think people are hysterical, but there was an idea. You know, what if he's so chaotic that he, you know, pushes the nuclear button or does crazy things? And we saw that he didn't do any of that. He was actually, in terms of his policies, he was pretty good, you know, and he didn't do anything. He didn't start any wars. He just lowered taxes. He was quite a good president. He said that his rhetoric was a bit over the place sometimes, but other than that, he was okay. So this time round, they're acting like they have no memory of you know, he didn't become a kind of a tyrant or do anything outrageous, but they seem to think that he still could, even though we've had an experience of him being a president, and he wasn't what they said he would be.
They said he was going to be, if he were re-elected, disastrous for Europe, for example.
Well, it's Project Fear all over again. We saw it with Brexit. We saw it, as Amy was saying, the first time that Trump was running for election, that we were electing, you know, Beelzebub in America, and people couldn't understand it. But I think now, actually, not everyone who's saying it is being deliberately dishonest. I think they genuinely believe this again for some reason. Why they would think that's the case, but the reality is, all of the things that they're concerned about, the January the 6th insurrection, which I think was greatly over-exaggerated, those don't actually concern the average voter. And actually, most voters have become numb to most of the issues which get the media and the establishment up in arms. And he's actually, so I think whatever the ranting and ravings of people like Janet Daly and some conservatives like David Frum in America and so forth, the Republican Party is Trump's party, and he's now winning over people who weren't in his 2016 demographic. So typically, people who didn't go to university or from lower income voted for Trump in 2016. This time around, it's not a sweeping huge victory over in terms of winning the vote of the university educated, but a large percentage of university educated and upper income brackets are now choosing Trump, which is a great turn up for the books. In fact, and it shows you how he's turned this around. In 2022, over 75% of university educated Republicans said they wanted someone other than Trump to run. This year, 60% of university educated want Trump to win. Really? That's a huge turnaround.
This is extraordinary, isn't it? And you simply would not have credited it, would you? I mean, you wouldn't think this happened. But I have to say, by the way, before we talk about that, is that apparently the tenor of Trump's speech in Iowa was quite conciliatory. I mean, for example, he didn't go into the whole, you know, look at me, I'm one big winner and you're all losers type of thing. It was very much, you know, you did well. I think he said you did well. It might be that terrible kind of magnanimity you get when someone knows that they've absolutely just trounced you, you know. But because I think his 51% vote was like more than all of them put together.
Oh yeah. But of course, the thing is, they've avoided attacking him because they know if they attack him, he's going to come down like a ton of bricks on them and destroy their reputation. And also, they will turn off future voters in the Republican Party. So, of course, there's no. You know, he's got every reason to be magnanimous because he knows that they're not a threat. It's when people are a threat to him that he comes out barking.
I think, you know, it's interesting how reputations go up and down. Now, this guy Vivek Ramaswamy now to me looks like a real kind of cheap spiv. Isn't it funny? I liked him originally, but now I look at it, when he was turning around, obviously saying, "I'm going to withdraw," and we only want, and he's fast talking. A lot of it is so fast, it's because it doesn't stand up to much analysis, So I've kind of changed on him a lot. DeSantis now is seen as being kind of a total kind of, sort of also ran, or literally also ran, isn't it?
Yeah. I think, it's...
I liked him though, actually.
Yeah, I like DeSantis. He didn't have a very good start to his election, to his campaign, and he has been a bit of a letdown, because I thought during the lockdown in Florida, he was amazing. I was really, we wanted him to be president. I was like...
Yes, well, apparently in Florida now...
It maybe turned on him a little bit, I think.
Well, but it's just... it's booming, and Nigel is out there at the moment, and he was saying, it's absolutely booming. It's an optimistic place. This is, it's fought off woke. It's all of these things. But apparently not enough.
Well, he shouldn't have run against Trump. I mean, everyone knew that he was Trump without Trump's personality deficits. And if he had simply waited another 4 years and run at the next election when Trump couldn't run, I think he probably would have had Trump's endorsement perhaps as the preferred candidate. So I think that was a huge mistake. And I think Vivek's quite clever to withdraw when he did, because he may be expecting to get some appointment if Trump comes into election. And of course, that's great news for Trump too, because all of Vivek's supporters actually have Trump down as their second choice. And so he's going to have another, I think Vivek got 8% of the vote. So that vote's going to be transferred in future votes.
I wonder actually, probably Ramaswamy's vote or support is quite young. I don't know, it's a hunch. Because he's a tech guy, isn't he? He's a tech billionaire. Is he a billionaire?
I think so, not sure.
Or whatever it is. Or we're getting into the trillionaire situation apparently now. Trillionaires are a thing,
right.
Who wants to be a trillionaire?
Yes, exactly. I don't. This whole point about young college kids going for Trump, which is quite extraordinary. I also read something this week, which was basically saying that this idea that the young people, which we've talked about a lot, haven't we, are automatically left-wing, that this is not true and whatever. You, I know, Rafe, have talked a lot about the fact that actually they say, young people get more right-wing as they get older, but this is not happening. I mean, wouldn't you say that, maybe what's happened with Trump and the support that we've seen, maybe does that give the lie to that a bit, or what?
No, not in the slightest, actually. What we have three different things going on. We have, in the Anglosphere, particularly in Britain and America, we have the most left-wing youth in recorded history. We have never had youth on a huge range of policy issues. They have left-wing views, and they are not becoming more conservative as they get older for a variety of reasons, primarily because capitalism has failed them. They can't get on the property ladder. They're still living at home with their parents. They can't get a decent job with security and promotion or a pension. So you've got that aspect. Then you have Western Europe, where the youth are right wing, and the youth of Western Europe are both right wing and left wing. What the thing that unites them is they're anti-democratic. They don't believe in the mainstream parties, and an amazing poll, 61% or so of them believe that a strong leader is preferred to democracy. They're not that concerned about democracy. So whether they choose to become radicalized on the left or the right is another issue. But all of the main nationalist parties on the right in Western Europe are fueled by youth, and they've got young leaders, and they've been very successful at marketing themselves towards the youth. Then you get to Eastern Europe, which is very interesting, because there you actually have a very strong left-wing youth dynamic, which is, and there's all reasons for this. In Western Europe, the youth there view the European Union in a very different light to the way that the youth here view it. They view the EU being the harsh people who imposed draconian policies on Greece and on Italy, etc., part of globalization. All the things that people in Britain think of the EU as being a golden sort of goose. People in Europe have just the opposite view to that. Whereas in Eastern Europe, they have a more positive view of the European Union, and they view their parties as basically being sort of proto-fascists. And so there's a rebellion against that. So there are three different sorts of things going on with the youth of the West.
Is it quite a... is that anything to do surely with the communist heritage?
Oh yes.
No, I mean amongst the young people.
Well, it's a fact that they feel that the European Union has given them the prosperity after the communist era, and that's basically, it's been a Western European approach that has given them the freedoms and the quality of life. Poland's going to surpass the UK's GDP in 2030. Apparently, this prosperity has come through EU membership. So the youth of Eastern Europe have a very different idea about the EU, for example, and globalization than Western Europe, where you have super high unemployment rates in Spain, Italy. The Golden Dawn in Greece is the majority party amongst youth which is
really they are the outright kind of fascists, aren't they?
And so it's very, very different dynamics wherever you go. And of course, particularly in Southern Europe, they have been the main repositories of the vast numbers of immigrants coming from North Africa and elsewhere. So it's also a rebellion against that.
I mean, do you not find that young people when I say young, what are we talking about here? Under 30? Or even like under 25? They all seem to think roughly the same, the ones at least that I come across. Or should I say, not in my life, because I'm surrounded by, these extremely bright, young, right-wing people, conservative people, whatever, really quite radical, far more than we were in many ways. But I mean, as a rule, to me, they all just seem to be what I would call kind of soft liberal, fashionable liberal.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because they've got more access to social media and different opinions than ever before. I was thinking when I grew up and went to secondary school and university, all I really got was kind of a left wing. That was just the default assumption, and I was never exposed to any conservative ideas. And I think now, if I had my phone and TikTok and YouTube, you come across kind of Ben Shapiro quite quickly, and you do hear about 12-year-olds quoting Ben Shapiro, and you think that never would have happened, 10 years ago or something. So I think there is some hope in that it's harder to control the narrative. So I think young people are able to be exposed to different ideas, which I think is positive. But the downside of that is that people also can get into echo chambers very quickly. So they just keep getting the algorithm keeps feeding them the same thing, and they can, as you say, become very radical in either direction. And they don't realise they've become quite radical because they're not getting exposure to a broader. It's very much on the internet. It's not with people.
But also they just don't watch the news.
Well, yes,
simple.
Yeah.
I mean, very few young people watch television of any sort. But nevertheless, I mean, I just wonder what it would take if there could be something or some trend that happened that changed our outlook about this. Actually, we would never have foreseen that happening. Just like you wouldn't have foreseen college kids supporting Trump. I don't know what it would be.
Well, I mean, basically, I mean, mainstream political parties need to learn the lessons of how successful these new parties have been in Europe in the way that they've appealed to youth deliberately. They hold, social events for them. They have very young candidates, in Denmark and elsewhere. People are in their 20s standing for election, and these people are very gifted. Whereas we suggest them to bring out the old war horses who don't appeal to youth demographic. You just look at our parliament, how old it is compared to, the youth of the future who we need to actually change. But the key thing in this country is to separate forever, to sever the link between this blind devotion to free market capitalism at all costs and the right. Because in Europe, you don't get that. They're still market-based economies, but there's not this libertarian free markets, buccaneers that we have over here. That's what puts off so many youth of today, thinking that's one of the reasons for the failure of their life chances. And if there could be a party here, much like the SDP, who are actually going to offer a more of a social democratic Nordic model, but still with those right-wing policies, that's how you bring about a solution to having any chance of a right-wing revival over here.
There you go. Well, there we are. So it's a challenge for you, isn't it? It's a challenge. Speaking of which, before we close, there've been a few little flickers of rumour, amongst the political, the Westminster bubble, that there might even be a Tory leadership race. If you can imagine, before the obviously there's going to be one after, but before the election, and I was just thinking, well, who the hell would be standing if that were the case? I mean, first of all, it's like an act of complete desperation, wouldn't it be? I mean, they're pretty desperate as it stands. This is all on the back of this big survey that was done in the Telegraph, and Lord Frost then commented extensively on it. But it was basically saying the Tories are wipe out, that you might as well do something drastic. So, up comes the leadership idea. I mean, it was pretty thin gruel, wasn't it, last time round when it was terrible, was the Liz Truss and these people. Who would actually stand even? Who could you go and kind of strong arm into standing for the leadership of the Tory party?
Well, this is going to be the biggest defeat since 1997. So I said, bring back John Major, put him in there, and we can all laugh at Groundhog Day repeating itself, and give the man another good thrashing, which he deserves.
Is there anybody that you look at and think, well, I wouldn't vote for them, but I can understand how they'd be quite a good leader?
Not too many. I mean, maybe Kemi. I mean, that's the only person that comes to mind, although she lacks the experience. But I mean, it's rather like being asked to be captain of a sinking ship. It's just, why would you? It says something about the person that they would want to,
Yes,
and yeah, I was looking through some of the kind of Tory MPs at the moment, and so many of them I'd never even heard of, and that is even such a dearth of talent. There's really is more so than ever.
There used to be back in well, I suppose it ended pretty much in the 80s, early 90s, but there used to be this kind of this section of MPs never quite were like the top thing, but they were always really good and reliable. People like Julian Amory and, well, even Alan Clark. They were sort of high quality but lower rungs. But, serious people. They seem to have pretty much gone. Anyway, answers on a postcard, please. Who would you like to see as the next Tory party leader?
The last Tory party leader.
Yes, exactly. The next and the last one. Anyway, we can but hope. Thanks very, very much indeed, Amy. And thank you, Ro. And we shall see you next time. Please don't forget those 2 dates, will you? See you again. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.